Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this week's edition of This Week in Milwaukee Rising with Technically. I'm Sorrina Beecher, the lead reporter for the region, and every week we feature an amazing individual or group that is shaping Milwaukee's economic landscape and highlighting solutions to help build a more equitable and inclusive future. And this week, I'm talking to one of my favorite people, Corry Joe Biddle. She's the executive director at FUEL Milwaukee and a trailblazer who's been transforming obstacles into opportunities for diverse young professionals for nearly 15 years. So we're going to learn more about Corry's journey to FUEL Milwaukee and dive into her captivating panel discussion series, Race Bridge, which has really made waves across the city. So hi, Corry. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to be speaking.
Sorrina, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Absolutely. And I know we have talked many times over the years, but the past couple of years have really kind of thrust you into the spotlight with everything that's been going on in the civil unrest. 2020 will be a milestone year for everybody. But I want to take a step back and just introduce people to FUEL Milwaukee. So you're the executive director. Tell us more about the organization.
So, FUEL Milwaukee is a community engagement organization that's really focused on talent attraction and retention to the Milwaukee region. Um, FUEL is an initiative, or essentially it's a program within the Metro Milwaukee Association of Commerce. You could call it the chamber. It's our largest regional chamber that serves the business community. Through FUEL, I support HR, within each of those companies. So if you think of it, HR departments, recruiters are doing a really great job of recruiting people into these positions. Sometimes the people are from Milwaukee or the region. Sometimes they're from outside. They could be from anywhere in the world and they come in for this opportunity. Well, you can imagine if you move for a job and you don't know anyone, you have to sort of build your life and know, where do I volunteer, and where's the great lunch spots, and what are the amenities in the city. That's what FUEL is designed to do for people who are from the region and not from the region. So the talent attraction and retention piece, I always say this is the soft side of economic development. The companies are recruiting the talent, keeping them super engaged at work from 9 to 5. And then after work, it's our job to make sure that they really feel knitted into the community of Milwaukee and that this starts to really feel like home, whether you're from here or not. And it's a place where you want to plant roots and stay. You might build your career by going to a different company, but we want you to go to a different company in the region because you enjoy living here so much. Your life is here. So, why would you want to leave? That if I'm doing my job, I'm making it hard for you to go somewhere else.
I love that. I know you've been with FUEL Milwaukee for 14, 15 years.
Yeah, I think it's 14
Which
years.
is hard to believe because I know I met you
know.
almost 10 years ago at this point. But you actually spent a lot of time working for America's Black Holocaust Museum. How did that experience shape your career?
My relationship with America's Black Holocaust Museum, it started as an internship. I was away at school and came home for summer break, and one of my friends called me. She was working there as a receptionist. She said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Nothing." She said, "Well, get up here and volunteer. Come on, we're like sending out invitations." So I really just went up there to, I thought, lick some invitations. And while I was there, I walked through the museum. Well, at that, I had never associated the word Holocaust with the Black experience before. And I really learned the meaning of the word Holocaust, and that it's a broader description of, destruction. And in this context, destruction of people, which was strategic and designed to break down and oppress a population, which was, African Americans, folks that live and were enslaved in America. Well, I walked through the museum and saw this journey that my ancestors have been through in this country, and the different forms of oppression and how it shows up in modern day society. I remember thinking, wow, this is really moving, and remembering that the museum that day was full of people. The big exhibit at that time, this was years ago, this is 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, the Henrietta Marie, which was a slave ship that was sunken off the coast of I think it was Key West, Florida. They found the ship, brought it up, and made an exhibit of it. That exhibit was in the museum at the time, and the museum was just full of people, and they weren't all Black people. And I think that surprised me. And it was a mix of people. Every race, creed, background, economic status that you could think of as far as what you could see visually. And folks were standing in front of the exhibits crying and having these experiences with each other. And you would see strangers talking to each other and engaging in conversation and comforting each other and really talking through how difficult it was to face the reality of oppression and what's happened to Black folks in our country. We all own this, that experience. I never was disconnected from the museum from that day forward. I ended up taking a job there as a proposal writer, a grant writer once I was out of school. And for 2.5 years, I served as the executive director, doing a lot of the programming and training the tour guides and giving tours to all the kids that came through. And again, volunteers from the corporate community, constantly a mixed group of people in that museum. I really learned how to have difficult conversations with folks who wanted to have them and create what we called a non-threatening environment. So a place where you could really say things that you think, oh, if I say this anywhere else, I would get I would be canceled. I would be canceled if I said this.
Yeah, right.
An environment where if you have a genuine, earnest question and it's coming from a place of learning, it's okay to say it and let's share it and let's think through and muddle through what we understand about race and racism and what we don't understand it. And a lot of times it's just a matter of conversation, context, people understanding somebody else's perspective. And then I could see people come together. Yeah, I learned a lot of things business-wise there from running the museum and, raising money and fundraising and all that. Learn how to put together exhibits. But I really, really learned how to have conversations across race that would normally be really challenging. And you do that by creating this environment where it's okay to ask questions because we all have questions.
And that's really interesting because you eventually landed at FUEL.
Yeah.
And one of the experience you shared with me is that, you went to this amazing event, and you'll have to remind me whether it was before or after you joined FUEL.
Yeah.
But you looked around, it was an amazing venue, a very chic bar, right? Downtown Milwaukee.
Yes.
Around, and there was only 2 people of color in the room. And that really affected you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
When I left the Holocaust Museum, I heard about FUEL Milwaukee and the MMAC, and I didn't really know about the chamber or FUEL. And people were saying, I think it's a group of really young people, and I think you would really enjoy it. I was passionate about marketing, and I had learned that when I was at the museum and really wanted to do some interesting creative marketing stuff. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go over here to this business network, this chamber, and this young professional group, and I'm going to do cool marketing. My first day at work, we had what we call a purely social event, which is basically is a after hours happy hour networking event for mostly young professionals. And they came from all kinds of companies. So we had 60 corporate members, and they're Northwestern Mutual and Manpower and Chase Bank and Wells Fargo, everybody that you could think of that works at a really big company here was at this social. And I remember walking in, and the place was beautiful. It was recently opened. It was called Mikey's. It was gorgeous, and I was really struck by that. And I thought, well, this is really cool. This is a pretty place. And there were over 200, maybe 300 people there, and they were all young and, just coming from work. And I'm like, these are my people. This is my tribe. But as I'm like seeing more and more people come through the door, I'm like, these are my people, but they not my people. Like, where are the Black people?
Right.
Wow, this is really crazy. But it made a lot of sense to me why so many people of color in Milwaukee, especially if they obtain their degree or they want to obtain a college degree, they don't picture themselves, especially at this time. This was like 14 years ago. They couldn't picture themselves in Milwaukee because they didn't see themselves in the rooms that were largely populated by professionals or young professionals, where you see photos of Black professionals mixing with other professionals or all Black, the diverse professional crowd. Milwaukee didn't have that look and feel. So you think, oh, I got to go to New York to get that, or I got to go to LA to get that. Well, the thing that I knew is that we had tons of Black professionals that were here. They just weren't networking in the same places.
Sure.
They weren't in the same, they weren't on the list. Not that they were excluded purposely, but they just weren't on the list. So We really did a good job of figuring out what list they were on and what we needed to do to include them in what we were doing as an organization.
And I know since you've joined the organization that more than 30% of your members are now people of color, if I'm not wrong. Maybe it's a little bit more now. But I know
Yes.
you've done a lot of work over the years making sure that that outreach has been done to other groups so that people, because they don't know what they don't know, right? And
That's
sometimes
right.
they might not feel invited, they might not feel reflected in those spaces. So I know that you guys have done an amazing job of doing just that. One thing I find so interesting about you and your story is that you, at the America's Black Holocaust Museum, we all feel so connected to history, but there's also a little bit of this disconnect, like that was then. And that
Yeah.
completely changed for you in 2020. So
Yeah.
not only did we have the pandemic, which greatly affected FUEL Milwaukee because you guys did a lot of in-person events, but with the murder of George Floyd, that really kind of brought you to a halt. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you were going through during that time? And then tell us about the Race Bridge series, because that's been an amazing panel discussion series here in Milwaukee that came out of sort of that very painful time.
Yeah. So I think once I came on staff at Fuel, I may have been the only Black person that had ever been on staff. And at the time, the organization had been 7 years old. But I was able to bring a perspective that the people at the time that were working and running the organization were really open to it. So, excuse me, we did a lot of work around our marketing, our branding, the music that we would play, the places we would go, the panelists. So I was always kind of pushing and driving towards more diversity of the organization and having more conversations around the segregation that is, such a theme of experience when you're living in Milwaukee. It's a reality. We're just in a
Sure.
segregated community. But when you're running a young professional group that's meant to attract and retain talent, it's not easy to talk about, let's talk about how beautiful the lakefront is and all these great jobs. And oh, by the way, let's tackle segregation. It wasn't the easiest kind of conversation to have, especially given what our mission was. But it was always really important to me. And there has always been some level of tolerance in the organization for us to have these conversations, in addition to celebrating all the assets and everything that is wonderful about Milwaukee. It's like, yes, let's make a nod and acknowledgement to some of the challenges. Well, I think people were kind of used to that, and they knew that this was something that would come for me as potentially, let's have a discussion about this.
Mm-hmm.
Pandemic happens. We're having a lot of great discussions about, how to stay safe and how to stay engaged in professional development. What are you going to do with your time now? That's what we were doing. And then George Floyd was murdered. And I just didn't know what to do with that information. Initially, it was just a personal and private happening that I thought, I'm going to see a lot of information on my news feed about this from my Black friends, because I was used to seeing that, police brutality, something would happen. Black friends would post about it. And my non-Black friends would just be like very quiet, or maybe, support with a like, but I wasn't hearing a lot from them on these issues. It just seemed like this is something that Black folks were struggling with, brown folks were struggling with on our own. Well, George Floyd's murder was different, and it was different immediately, because what I saw on my feed was my friends of all races and all backgrounds, really speaking up, and not just, oh, this is a shame. Like, call to action, police better get it together, we're furious. They were really, really, really angry, right? So I thought, let's have one conversation about this. We'll take one of the webinars we've been doing and make it about George Floyd. So what's the reaction? What's your reaction? So let people get it off their chest. We pulled together a panel of folks that could react to it and promoted it and say, hey, we're going to do this. And I think the 400 people showed up. We had been getting 200, 300, 400 people showed up to that initial conversation. And it was just a candid conversation about, like, this is how this makes me feel. And I'm like, I'm so angry. And did you see the video? It's the same thing that people around the world, I think, were doing, either formally or in their living rooms. So I noticed that in the chat, folks were saying, wow, I never thought of I never thought of that before. Oh, could you say more about this? And you know what? We should have another conversation. Could you cover? And there were a lot of white members that wanted to understand the perspective of people of color because they didn't understand that how bad it was
Yeah.
and how real racism and segregation is today and showing up in people's lives. So we did the second um, conversation, which was, what is the experience of racism? And that's the panel that you were a part of. And I just had people of color to say, what was the first time you were othered because of your race?
Yeah.
And I think we had it was like 400 or 500 people that showed up today. And it's a mixed group of people. They want to hear your perspective. And they're in the chat saying, wow, I can't believe this stuff is really happening, because they had no idea. They were completely blocked in silo. They had no clue that so many people of color were facing discrimination and racism and othering in the ways that show up. So again, in the chat, more questions. I kept getting emails and people say, could you talk about this? Could you talk about this? I would love to hear more. And I thought, okay, we're doing this. We're just gonna do it. And I was a little afraid at first. I'm like, what's the tolerance of white folks to, keep having these difficult conversations? And they were all in. I mean, they were all about it. So we branded it as Race Bridge. Once a week for several months, probably for 6 months. We did this once a week where we had conversations and pulled panels of Milwaukeeans together, or people who had lived in Milwaukee and gone to other places, and talked about just anything that you could think of, words that you shouldn't use, phrases that have racist backgrounds, cultural appropriation, anti-Asian sentiment, what it is to be a Black man in America. I mean, what it is to be a white man in this environment, and what do you owe the community as a white man. We covered everything. So we got to the point now where we're still doing them, and we're doing them once a month. The topics are all race, racism, inclusion, and really what it is to work as a community to move towards greater equity. And it has been fantastic. So much news coverage, so much excitement. Like I just never expected. I'd never expected it to be supported in the way that it is. And now there are people who are not even FUEL members or not even young professionals that just show up to every Race Bridge and participate. It's been amazing.
And I think something that's so interesting that you just brought up is, it didn't just focus on, Black folks, right? It didn't just focus on what was happening, with the murder of George Floyd and those feelings and the civil unrest. I mean, it was really sort of this big inclusive, it really kind of blew open the doors on a conversation that a lot of people avoided, especially in professional settings. And so, I know that you spoke to me earlier a little bit about, you took away lessons. I mean, none of us know it all, but you learned a lot about the Native American experience. You learned a lot about, Asians who are also navigating sort of that sentiment of hate that's been taking place. What was this like for you? I mean, again, I have had friends who are like, oh no, we never brought up race. I was climbing the ladder. So I just kept, all those feelings to myself. What has been your feelings or your experience, and how has it impacted you since you've kind of launched this conversation and now it's kind of all out in the open?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm grateful that so many people are open to having a conversation, because I think as a person of color, any oppressed group, when you're a person that's in a group that's oppressed, it is constantly on your mind to solve it and to heal it. And when you see it anywhere in the organizations you're a part of, the places where you work, whatever it is, it's like, I want to talk about this. I want to get this out. And sometimes when you're a part of an organization, I'm a Black woman running a largely white organization. I'm a Black woman in a chamber that is, largely white. So it can be difficult to be the person that's always bringing up race or always bringing up gender, especially if the group just doesn't get it and they don't want to hear about it. I think in this climate, it has given me a lot of hope that things will change. And it's reinforced my belief that really information and understanding is the key to a lot of this. it's easy to turn a blind eye and seem irritated or frustrated talking about why is it all about race? Why, and it's like, we on a race bridge, if somebody says that, then we can say, well, I'm not making it all about race. It actually is an issue of race. And let me explain to you how. And then you
Mhm.
give the examples and you can talk about the systems and you can look at the ways in which things were built for people who don't look like those who are oppressed. That takes time to do. It takes every week for 6 months and beyond of those kind of conversations for the evolution of understanding. And this sort of hardwired, racism is over, I don't see color. It's hardwired into so many people, and they
Yeah.
want to hold on to that because it is safe and it is comfortable, but it is not true. The opposite is playing out in front of us every day. And it's this cognitive
Mhm.
dissonance, really, that you're like hiding behind because it's hard to face something that you don't understand. Well, being able to have these conversations in the professional setting has opened up a dialogue and is normalizing
Mm.
the call out, of systems and practices that are not equitable. And it's been very refreshing and it's given me a hope that the business environments that my kids will go into will be different than the ones that you and I started our
Mhm.
careers in.
Absolutely. There's one thing that you really stress is this, not an idea of authenticity, authenticity. We know that, kind of like you said, a lot of people didn't know how to react or respond publicly. And so some people became stagnant by that. Other
Mhm.
organizations may have rushed to put out statements that maybe felt hollow
Yeah.
or, you know, they weren't full of substance at the time. Why is authenticity so important in driving equity and inclusion in Milwaukee? And not just in a professional setting, but maybe across the board?
Yeah. I think for me, authenticity, the idea of it is about showing up in the way that you actually are. And for all of us, it is a journey to
Mhm.
accept the way that we actually are and who we are, who we want to be. That's not to say that we're not developing and growing and improving and challenging ourselves every day, but the core root of how you express yourself, the core root of how you think about things and communicate and share and interact. You know, I think as a person of color, and a lot of people understand this, and there's so many studies that women do this in all male environments, and people of color do this in all white environments, where you try to come into the environment and assimilate as much as possible, which requires the stripping away of the natural elements of your personality, the way that you think or the way that you process information,
Mhm.
because you're trying to, I'm trying to look more analytical, or I'm trying to show up in a way that is not as emotional, or I'm trying not to use my hands as much, or
Mhm.
I'm not going to twist my neck, and I've learned that to be professional doesn't require for you to strip away who you really are and your real experiences and your real lens on life. It's been an ongoing journey for me. And on the flip side, to accept the same from other people,
Mhm.
however it shows up, whether I like it or not, but to accept somebody's authentic self in the way that they show up. Because when we do that, that is inclusion. That
Yeah.
is the start of equity. You know, it is that we're not, you can sit at this lunch table. You're weird. Okay, that's fine. I like weird. You can sit here. You're black, you're a woman, you're, whatever it is, and accept people to be a part of the conversation, of the organization, of the solution, and know that they bring a value that you just don't bring. And that
Mhm.
it's not as good if they're not here at the table. And to really believe that, to really, and not just say it, but to look, we need, somebody's missing, because if we don't have all these different perspectives and all these different people and all these different experiences, and we don't acknowledge and truly believe that they bring value, we are missing out
Yeah.
on All of those statements that went out that were hollow and they landed like that because it was one or two people that wrote it and they didn't circulate it through the organization. They didn't have everybody look at it and say, okay, take off your politically correct hat. If you read this in your email, how would you react to it? And what a Black person would say is very different than what an Asian person would say, or a Hispanic person would say, or somebody who's differently able is going to say, and until you do that, until you make it a practice, and until you accept people who they actually are, for their way that they dress, their accent, the food that they like to eat, the way that they express disappointment, the way that they express excitement, all of those things, that's all inclusion. And that is the job. If our jobs are to create an environment, a culture of inclusion, it is to accept somebody's authentic self, all of their authenticity, and to show up that way ourselves and normalize the difference between people. We celebrate this, homogenous sort of idea of what business is, or what professional is, or what success is, and it's just boring, and it's not realistic, and it's holding people back, and it's depriving all of us of the true richness that all of these people really could be bringing to our experiences, our cultures, our product lines, our sales systems, everything. We're just missing out if we don't really, really celebrate authenticity.
And that's really interesting, because as sort of monumental that this discussion series has been, MMAC and FUEL Milwaukee have also launched, they've taken some action with the Region of Choice initiative. So can you tell our viewers a little bit about Region of Choice and why this is important to doing everything that you just said,
Absolutely.
moving these initiatives forward?
So Region of Choice comes out of the MMAC side of the work. So that's the chamber side. The board is 100% CEOs, and they were surveyed by MMAC staff. What are the challenges to running and growing your business in the Milwaukee region, and what are some of the assets? The challenges list is what really sparked the Region of Choice. And our president of the chamber, Tim Sheehy, has said, we knew that segregation was going to be on the list. We knew that racial disparity was going to be on the list. We did not expect for it to be number one in so many survey responses. So that really sparked a discussion around, well, what is it that we can do as a business community to sort of combat and start to turn around these economic disparities for people of color? And there you have the Region of Choice initiative. The initiative has two goals. One is on the representation side, to increase the numbers of Black and Brown managers in Milwaukee region companies by 25% over what the number is right now. And we have 5 years to do it. The second piece of the representation goal is to increase the numbers of Black and Brown people and employees at large working in any of the companies by 15% over the numbers when we started. And again, we have 5 years to do it. So by 2023, we will have reached those goals or exceeded them based on where our numbers are right now. And this represents twice the change in half the time.
Oh, wow.
The rate of change if we hadn't done it. So if we hadn't done it, the rate would be half the pace that we're at now. So actually putting the effort around it and having the conversation has truly accelerated the rate at which these companies are advancing Black and Brown talent through their organizations or hiring them. And we have 129 companies that have signed this pledge. All the CEOs have signed it. That represents 120,000 employees in the region that are employed by these companies that signed the pledge. And every day we have people that are working towards increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of these companies. And it is really has been very exciting to work on.
That's amazing. And I know that was that launched last year? So this is just in a year's time?
Yeah, it's closer to 2 years now. We started to collect some data from the company. So the company signed the pledge, and then they give us their employment data.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We report the data out in aggregate. So it's not like we're calling out any one company, but they tell us this is who is employed. These are the folks who are managers. And here's the racial breakdown of our managers as it stands right now. And then a year from now, they'll do the same thing again. We'll put all the company's data together and we're able to report out what the aggregate, what the
Mhm.
success has been. And every company takes different strategies and they're all doing something different internally. But we have a network of 100, almost 130 companies and professionals that are working to move this forward for the region, to make Milwaukee a region of choice. It's really exciting.
That definitely is. I know it's come such a long way. I know we still have so much further to go, but between your work with Fuel Milwaukee and the Race Bridge series, and then also this Region of Choice initiative, what do you think other cities can learn from this? Now, not everybody has quite the same high rate of
Yeah.
segregation, and low diverse, or non-diverse workforces here, but a lot of them are facing the same issues. I mean, we know that across the country. So, what do you think other cities can take away from some of the work that you've done?
I think it's so important to tell the story with data so that people can see it, so people can understand. Because especially I think we're in a world now where we hear about racial disparity and segregation. You hear about it enough that most people kind of know that it exists and accept that it exists on some level. But to really understand what that looks like in your own community. Now, for Milwaukee, the segregation piece was a big thing because of the segregation and the fact that people don't socialize these kind of ideas like they would in a more transient city. So
Mhm.
you're not gonna walk into a restaurant and see a table of black, brown, white folks talking about race in general,
Yeah.
casually. That might happen in different environments, but for Milwaukee, it's not something that would happen because we just socialize in such a segregated way. So
Mhm.
there's two Milwaukees, right? So this the reality of people who say, wow, this is really challenging, and this cultural environment is really kind of hard for me as a person of color. And then you have white folks which were having a completely different experience and say, well, I'm sure that happens, but my neighborhood's beautiful. I mean, I'm not seeing any of that. What are you talking about? Once we were able to kind of give the data and say the initial launch of Region of Choice, we said we're going to compare Milwaukee to, you know, 15 peer metro cities. And we're going to have these criteria around racial disparity. And let's just see, where does Milwaukee land on the list? And the average person, well, I would be somewhere in the middle. You would have thought, we're not doing that bad. We were dead last in every indicator. And we were able to put that in black and white and show them a chart. These are the indicators: the number of single parent households, the educational attainment, the average annual income by race, and what is the gap between. We had the worst gap between white annual income and black and brown annual
Mhm.
income. It's this huge gap that if
Mhm.
you're a white person and you're making this great salary, you have no idea that the other side of Milwaukee is really struggling to even find money to put their kids on the bus and send them to school. I mean, completely different realities, which is something that is hard to communicate without being able to tell a story through data and numbers. We supported those numbers with the actual narratives and the stories and the experiences. And we continue to tell a story through numbers by collecting the data from all the companies and saying, how many black and brown managers do you really have? And that's the truth. That's the hard truth. That is, when you start to really look at the numbers, it tells a story that is challenging for a lot of people. Well, I would say any community, you got to start with telling the story of the numbers, because to me, I think it made all the difference in the acceptance of the business community and
Mhm.
people who aren't of color, and really getting behind this effort, because they didn't know how bad it was. And not just a general blanket state. You got to get really granular and say, what is happening in your community? What is the graduation rate for white people? What is it for black people? What is it for Hispanic people? What is it for
Mhm.
Asian? And then you start to see and layer all those disparities on top. The health disparities in the birth rate and the death rate for newborns, all of that is deeply, deeply affected, and it changes based on what race a person is. Well, if you don't know that, you think your reality is the only one, and that is just not the case.
That's
And
right.
the numbers told the story, and it will continue to tell stories.
That's good to hear. Follow the data, right? Follow the numbers.
Follow the data.
I know we only have about a minute of time left, but I would love for you to tell people how they can get in touch or get engaged in efforts just like this. I'm going to drop your website again here below.
So there's two websites that folks can check out if you want to learn more about Region of Choice and what it really is to get the business community behind, improving racial equity for your city or your community. You want to just Google Metro Milwaukee Association of Commerce. Our website is mmac.org. And then if you want to look more at the talent side, attraction and retention, and race bridge, then you're going to look at FUEL Milwaukee. .org, and we're all in the same pot. It's just a different field has a different audience, but we're within the chamber.
Well, Corry, thank you so much for your time. This was an amazing conversation. I hope people really think about, having those conversations if they were always afraid to engage in those conversations. I hope that, other people, feel open and free to bring their authentic selves to the table. And I do just really quick, the conversation does not have to end here. We're going to be posting a recap of my conversation with Corry today on the Technically website, and we're going to be sharing her story in next week's weekly newsletter. And to subscribe, I'm going to drop the link below. And if there's anything else, any other thoughts that you want to share, you can email me at Milwaukee@technically. Read more in our series. Thank you so much for your time, Corry. I appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. Thank you so much. This is great.
You have a wonderful day, and thank you everyone else for joining us.